Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known facts behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We are your kings of crikey, your bushmen of banality, your Vegemite sandwiches of very granular facts. My name is Jordan Runtagh.
And I'm the ghost of Rod Ansell.
They don't know what that means yet.
And you don't get that. They will.
Your kids are gonna love it.
I guess you're not ready for Rod Ansell, but your kids are gonna love him.
Today we are looking at Crocodile Dundee, a surprise hit from Down Under when it arrived on American shores in 1986. It's since become a cultural phenomenon, with writer-performer Paul Hogan's character, Michael J. Crocodile Dundee, becoming a sort of one-man ambassador of the local charm and natural beauty of Australia, or a one-man stereotype, depending on how you view it. The trilogy made Hogan a star around the world and a legend in his native Australia, where he's known by the affectionate metonym Hogs. I think that's how you pronounce it, Hogs, as in short for Hogan.
Yeah, the way you spelled it, I thought it might have been Hoges.
I think it's Hogs. Side note, he's almost 85. Like, in my mind, he's perpetually sleeveless and tan and muscular. Yeah. He's getting up there.
I mean, only God can kill an Australian man. Well, and like autoerotic asphyxiation.
We'll get to that too.
In excess, catching a stray.
Oh, it's in.
Oh, it's starting to catch up with him. He doesn't look great.
He's 85.
And like white, descended from British stock, spent half his life in the sun. A good face care routine is so important, people. I was really taken aback by a tweet that went around recently, which is, I'm paraphrasing, it was something to the effect of, Americans are always so shocked when they learn how much Australians hate them.
I didn't see that, and I didn't know that.
Well, I was taken aback not because of, yes, I was shocked, but I was also taken aback not because I desperately crave the approval of a bunch of sunburnt racists, because I can get that if I just go to the South and pretend to care about football. But it's because of how similar I feel like Americans and Australians are. Am I talking on my ass here? Do you feel that?
I have never really thought about that much.
We're both descended from the same awful British stock.
Well, only one of us are prisoners, because wasn't Australia originally basically a giant prison camp?
Yeah. They don't like talking about that.
Oh, they don't? Okay.
But we are also alike in the way that we've both committed atrocities against the indigenous peoples of our country, and we're both rowdy and boisterous. I generally love every Australian I've ever met, actually, in one-on-one interactions. But I am struck by and hardly the first person to be so, by the disconnect between the gregariousness and charm of the people and the fact that half their country is just a vast, screaming wasteland that constantly issues all manner of fauna that are trying to kill you. And, they get a pass for me because of Nick Cave and AC/DC.
Oh, sure.
And the song K-San by Cold Chisel.
Oh, I saw Cold Chisel live. Yeah, okay. All right. I can see how...
Hammered, right?
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, which one of us? But yes.
I wish it was you.
Fair.
If you were drunker than a performer at any given thing, I would seriously question your health. But especially if it was Cold Chisel, good Lord.
Jesus.
It's also funny that like a third of Paul Hogan's wiki is about his alleged tax evasion.
Oh, yeah. No, I didn't really get into that in here, but it kind of adds to his mystique, his lore.
Well, it seems like he won, against the government, Yeah,
I think he sued the Australian government.
And he won certain key decisions, but at the end of the day, they were still like, I'm pretty sure you hid $40 million from us in a Swiss bank account.
Yep.
And he insists he's done nothing wrong, and I'm sure within the constraints of creative bookkeeping, he didn't. But,
He compared the government to the Taliban, which I appreciate.
Is that classic Australian tact?
Well, for those of you who haven't seen Crocodile Dundee in a while, the story begins when New York reporter Sue Charlton journeys to the Southern Hemisphere to interview Mick Crocodile Dundee, a mysterious hunter who's rumored to have survived in the wild after having his leg bitten off by a crocodile before defying the odds and making it out of the outback and back to civilization.
And into all of our hearts.
And into all of our hearts. However, when this reporter meets Crocodile Dundee, she discovers that the story's been exaggerated slightly, and he was just maimed and scarred very badly by said crocodile. A love bite, as he calls it. But his story is remarkable nonetheless. Apparently, Dundee was born in a cave in the Northern Territory and raised by indigenous Australians. He's unaware of his age, with the Aboriginal elders telling him only that he was, quote, born in the summertime. Prior to the beautiful reporter's arrival, he'd never been to a city, quipping, cities are crowded, right? If I went and lived in some city, I'd only make it worse. Which is both logically true and self-deprecating.
Yeah.
So the reporter winds up bringing him to New York City, where hilarity and romance ensues.
I'm fully admitting that I'm about to steal a bit from Hal Sparks on I Love the 80s.
Okay, go on.
Actually, it might have been Michael Ian Black. It was a slight brunette man who was one of the most popular talking heads on those shows. And he was like, I don't think Australians are that confused by, like, cars. He just says, a car? What's a car? And it also reminds me of, like, when in 30 Rock, when Jenna is in method in character for the unlicensed Janis Joplin biography, and she's in Jack's office, and she's like, "Hey man, what is that iron bird in the sky?" They had planes in the 60s, Jenna. It is a funny premise that he's just like, I mean, bidets are.
But bidets are confusing, yes.
Bidets are confusing.
Yes, yeah. Just a quick note. A rare moment of sincerity here. This episode marks the first in our Sponsored by Listeners Like You series, just like my beloved PBS growing up. Last week, we inaugurated a digital tip jar, Ko-fi, I'm told it's pronounced, which we put in the episode's description. Not to get too corporate inside baseball, but for the last year and a half, my employers have allowed me to continue to produce this show for the network, but on my own time and without a budget, which sounds passive-aggressive, but they could have just as easily canceled it, so I'm grateful. This means that we're more or less doing it for fun at this point, and because you, dear listeners, have made this such a joy, and we want to be there for you in all the ways that you've been there for us. But it is indeed a lot of work with a lot of unforeseen costs that crop up. So rather than do any kind of paywall Patreon kind of thing, we landed on a pay-what-you-wish digital tip jar kind of deal just to make this a little more sustainable. And the response so far has been truly overwhelming. We don't say this enough, but we are so grateful to you all for being so generous with your time and spending all these hours with us as we spout our facts and do our silly little bits. And we especially want to thank everyone who contributed to the Ko-fi page. It's so unbelievably helpful. The notes are so sweet that, frankly, I get choked up just thinking about it.
Leave us a note. We'll say something. I will. Jordan, you have the login, though, right? But
oh, yes, I do. Yes.
It's been incredibly heartwarming, everyone. Thank you so much.
It really is. I mean, frankly, things have been a little weird on the old home front lately, and the support from all of you means more than you could ever know. And I hope you realize how much we love doing this for you all. We hope to keep doing these episodes as long as we can. And, it's tough with podcasts, but we want this to be as interactive and as inclusive as it can possibly be. We absolutely love when you reach out to us on Twitter or Instagram or even through the Apple Podcast reviews. We want to do whatever we can to have it feel like a true back and forth because we consider you friends of ours. And if you're hearing this right now, that means you.
We will not do weird, racist, or offensive for money.
Have you gotten requests for that?
No, but I'm saying if someone is like, here's $200, like cover, neo-Nazi punk band Screwdriver, I would be like, I'll take your money, but I'm not going to make that episode. So I don't think you can request a refund. Maybe you can. I don't know. Anyway.
I didn't see that coming. But yeah, one of the cool things about this bizarre medium and this super weird technological time we live in now is that so many great people have come into our lives through doing this show. And, I was just texting one of them today about Mama Cass's birthday. And yesterday I had a great bao bun lunch with another. And next week I'm going to see a Paul McCartney concert movie with another. It's just been very, very special, and I want to take a minute to thank you for your support in all of its many forms. It truly means the world.
Yeah, and if you give us an extra $10, I'll put Jordan's address in the message. And a list of his fears.
And, you know, one of the upsides of donating is that it makes us feel more inclined to do your requests.
Hell yes, it does.
Yes, it does. We've been slowly but surely working our way through them. The Purple Rain two-parter went out to our friend Andre, and today's episode goes out to friend of the pod, Phil, one of the greatest friends this show has ever had. He's been requesting episodes for literally years now, and we have not been there for him, so we owe him one. We hope he enjoys this one. Well, from the truly insane real-life story that kinda-maybe-sorta inspired the plot, to the tabloid love triangle that emerged from the production, the Aussie rock star who helped bring the movie to the big screen, and all the ways it changed the face of tourism for an entire continent, here is everything you didn't know about Crocodile Dundee.
Strewth.
What does that mean? I keep seeing that.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know anything. Half my Australian slang just comes from like a single YouTube video of a guy ranting about Straya Day.
Oh, yeah.
It's like their 4th of July.
Right. Wasn't the...
Get at me country. Get at me country. Get at me country.
Wasn't the succulent Chinese meal guy Australian? Or was he arrested in Australia and he was English?
He did not have an Australian accent, no. He had like beautiful like King's English
That's true.
RP, received pronunciation, boarding school voice.
But wasn't he arrested in Australia?
Sure, why not?
He just died recently.
Yeah, I
I
know.
know, it's sad.
R.I.P. to that man.
Yeah. Well, for years, Paul Hogan claimed that his fish out of water story of an Australian bushman in the big city was inspired by his own first trip to New York in the early 80s. A time when apparently Australian accents were relatively uncommon, despite the fact that Grease had just come out. Apparently, New Yorkers assumed that Paul was Scottish, which would have made him the world's tannest Scotsman.
We are such a dumb people.
He apparently really did walk around New York saying good day to all the New Yorkers, which is a hilarious image for a city that had recently been terrorized by the Son of Sam.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a great time to be weird and super friendly in New York.
True.
Like,
Yes. As Paul Hogan later told the BBC, I felt like an alien from another planet. Some of the bushy guys I know would feel even more out of place. There's a myth that there's a real Crocodile Dundee, but there isn't. Well, Paul, most of Australia would beg to differ. Though Paul Hogan would deny it, many believe that the character of Mick Crocodile Dundee was based on the astonishing true life story of an Australian man named Rod Ansell. Rod had become something of a folk hero in Australia after he survived more than 7 weeks on a small island at the mouth of a crocodile-infested river in the remote Northern Territory. The incident occurred in 1977 when he was sailing down the Fitzmaurice River. To this day, it's unclear exactly why he was doing this.
I should, hang on. I gotta drum up some ambience.
You can have like a didgeridoo in the background. I mean, just go to an Outback commercial.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna give you yes, that's a passable.
Yeah.
But that's a kookaburra. No, it's also part of my new noise project. You should throw a bunch of reverb on that.
Okay. To this day, it's unclear why Rod Ansell was on the river in the first place. He would claim it was a fishing trip, but as his Wikipedia reads, he was not specific about his plans, only telling his then-girlfriend Lorraine that he would be back in a few months. Ansell's motorboat was then capsized and sunk by, quote, something big. He would later sensationally claim that it was a whale, and I've also read that it was a crocodile.
It's definitely a crocodile. The river is mile. I went and checked because I was like, that sounds implausible. And sure enough, there are whales around the different coasts of Australia, but that river is so far inland, it must have been a fucking idiot of a whale to get lost.
Or he was a bad sailor and he hit nothing and he...
Yeah, that's also equally likely.
Yeah, I mean, it's... Yeah. Whatever the case, the boat sank and Rod jumped into a dinghy and salvaged his 2 8-week-old bull terriers. No idea why he brought 2 puppies on this expedition, a rifle, a knife, some canned food, and bedding. The dinghy washed ashore on a small island at the mouth of the river, and Ansell slept in between the roots of a tree just out of reach of crocodiles, but up close and personal with a brown tree snake. Without any drinking water, Ansel had to catch wild cattle and suck their blood to keep them hydrated.
Oh, that's normal. That's what the Mongols did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is truly insane. He caught bees and tied threads to their bodies so he could follow them to their hives and obtain honey to help
That's
keep
wild.
them nourished. That's insane. At one point, Rod shot a 16-foot crocodile whose head he kept as a souvenir.
They're good eats, too. I don't really mind crocodile. Yeah.
Have you had it? What's it taste like?
There's a place in my college town that did fried crocodile bites. It was like the New Orleans bar. I've had crocodile jerky, and I don't really like it. I think you do have to I think you got to just deep fry them. But, you know.
Well, deep fry anything tastes good.
What can't you deep fry these days?
Hell yeah, brother.
That's NASCAR, baby.
Rod roamed for 7 weeks. Apparently, he was 120 miles from the nearest settlement, and he basically assumed that he was just running out the clock and would die where he was. But then he stumbled on 2 Aboriginal stockmen and their boss, who led him to safety. Or so he claimed. Grain of salt, grain of salt. According to Ron Ansel, he initially intended to downplay his ordeal, fearing that his recklessness would upset his mother.
Aw.
Yeah, remember that all. Remember that.
Oh, yeah, I know. I read ahead.
Okay, yeah. Once the media got a hold of his story, however, it took on a life of its own. He was dubbed the modern-day Robinson Crusoe. Journalist Robert Milliken would say of Ansel, he was charming. He seems to have never worn shoes, even when traveling on aircraft, and staying in city hotels at the height of his fame. The press went absolutely mad over his story, and no one seemed to mind if the details grew even more incredible. Rod would publish a memoir in 1980 entitled To Fight the Wild, which was always viewed very skeptically by locals of Australia's rugged top end. Many wondered why he went fishing alone in such a dangerous area, which is a great question. Privately, Rod confided to friends that he wasn't fishing, but he was actually illegally poaching crocodiles, which would maybe explain a lot of why he was so cagey about all this.
You can't poach crocodiles. They're reptiles. They just, like, grow from the earth. They're dinosaurs, dude. Like, that's not poaching. That's like a fair match between man and beast. It's not like a white-tailed deer.
The man was all...
I mean, I guess if you have a gun, but, you know, still.
The man was always good for a quote, including this gem, which seems designed to remind people that he's Australian. Can you do an Australian accent? Can you read this? I can't do it.
It's so... mine just falls apart.
Okay.
But let me see if I can...
Try it out. Here, I'll highlight it for you.
All the blokes up in this country who work with cattle, ringers, stockmen, bull catchers, whatever. All of them have really narrow shaves all the time. It's edging into New Zealand. I can only sustain it for like a phrase or two. But they never talk about it. No, that's just offensive. Sorry, Australians. I think the opinion is that if you come through in one piece and you're still alive, then nothing else matters. That's a sick line.
Yeah, it is.
And then he says, it's like going out to shoot a kangaroo. You don't come back and say you missed by half an inch. You either got him or you didn't. So that's how I looked at it. Until the paper got a hold of the story, and that changed a lot of things.
Very good, very good. Rod Ansel was interviewed by the legendary British broadcaster Michael Parkinson, Parky to our beloved British listeners. They'll be very familiar with him. And Ansel attended this interview barefoot and admitted to sleeping on the floor of the luxury hotel that the producers had booked him into because he was more comfortable there.
I'm sorry. Come on, guy.
And he also shared the fact that he was mystified by the bidet.
Well, yeah.
The whole sleeping on the floor thing and the whole bidet confusion are two details that would surface in the Crocodile Dundee film. I mean, say what you will about this Ansel guy. He and his family would apparently live under a canvas sheet with no electricity or running water, communicating by radio and cooking over a campfire. So maybe the bed was a little too foreign for him after all.
Yeah, I feel like you can get away with a lot of stuff in Australia because people are just like, yeah, that makes sense. Sure, I buy that.
A ruthlessly practical people.
It's really funny to me because there's this Johnny Cash record I have called Mean as Hell, which is about, it's like Western ballads. And in the liner notes of it, he claims to have prepared for this record by, let me see if I can do a Johnny Cash. sleeping under mesquite bushes and in gullies, sitting for hours beneath a manzanita bush in ancient Indian burial ground, and breathing the west wind and hearing the tales it tells only to those who listen.
That's
He also added that he ate mesquite beans and squeezed the water from a barrel cactus, learned how to throw a Bowie knife and kill a jackrabbit at 40 yards, and was once saved by a forest ranger, lying flat on my back, starving. So, I don't know.
Is that where we get that picture of Johnny Cash with cake all over his face afterwards? Is that the aftermath?
No, but I mean, the famous thing about Johnny Cash is so funny is that I believe this was the same year or like within 1 year of him burning down like an enormous chunk of California forest and like killing half the condors that were alive in the world at that point. And then in court, he said, I don't give a damn about your filthy, dirty buzzards.
Is that the quote?
Something like that, yeah.
That's shades of Charlton Heston in Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if anybody's built up like the appropriate sort of karma to kill half the condors, it's kind of Johnny Cash, right?
You think so?
Yeah, who else?
I'd give it to James Brown.
Sure.
He's the hardest working man in show business. Let him kill a couple of condors as a treat.
Yeah.
It really would have been funny if it was Brian Wilson. That would have shut him down for forever. God, we could have been spared the entirety of the Mike Love era if he had just killed all. Well, now that got dark. If he just snapped, in the right room with the right gun. Sorry.
You know the Mike Love story about him in the early 70s where he was just on this... our friend of the pod, Dora, will remind me of more of the finer points of this, but he basically like went on like a juice fast and just like didn't sleep for days and meditated and then like led... I believe the police were involved with some kind of high-speed chase and he just completely freaked out.
Good for him.
And he blamed it on his, quote, tainted Wilson blood, because he's Brian Wilson's cousin.
That's a good band name. I might have to use that.
Tainted Wilson Blood. Yeah, that's your new EP.
Yeah. So it would be logical to assume that this tailor-made for the zeitgeist story, complete with very specific elements that would turn up in the film, inspired Crocodile Dundee. But Paul Hogan has never copped to it, which part of me is like, never let him see you blink. Part of me is also like, you bad man, you garbage human, because this made Rod Ansel extremely bitter, and he somewhat understandably felt entitled to some royalties or at least recognition, which would never be forthcoming. And after the global success of the film, Ansel would eventually take Hogan to court in an attempt to get a piece of the sweet, sweet Dundee cash, but the case was rejected. And then things went from bad to worse for old Ronnie. Fame took its predictable toll on his... I'm going to do the behind the music thing. Music bed shifts into a minor chord. Fame took its predictable toll on Ansel's personal life, and his marriage soon imploded. By 1992, he was convicted of stealing cattle and assaulting the owner of a ranch. He moved onto a parcel of land owned by his new girlfriend, a former tour guide, where he started growing his own marijuana and injecting speed with what one outlet describes as a vengeance, leading to increasingly regular incidents of drug-induced psychosis. That's not fair to drugs. Could just be regular psychosis. He became increasingly paranoid, blaming his problems on a government program culling wild buffalo to decrease tuberculosis in the cattle industry. Now, Ansel had been hunting wild buffalo for part of his living ever since he was a teen, and he began to believe that the police and the government were conspiring against him. His new girlfriend didn't do much to help. She told him that her family had been members of a secret medieval fraternity, and that as a child she had witnessed the sacrifice of young girls that were, quote, brought out of the woods to be bound, raped, and slaughtered. It's actually pretty plausible.
Really?
If you read some of the weird shit that I do. Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
This is that whole David McGowan thing about serial killers and the elaborate web of international 1% pedophilia that sprung from it or because of it. I lost the plot a little on that one. But clearly, both of these people were on edge.
As it were, in the parlance of the times. It got worse when they saw, or claimed to see, 3 bow hunters dressed in camouflage with night vision goggles near their bush camp. This, and the meth, didn't help. I mean, if you saw 3 camouflaged bow hunters outside your campground,
I would assume they were hunting.
sure.
The man was a poacher and hunter his whole life, and he just sees other people with better outfits and flips out. But it was definitely the meth.
I mean, I see people with better outfits and I flip out too. This all ended in tragedy. That's not a great segue. In August 1999, when Rod Ansel died in a drug-fueled shootout that left 1 police officer dead and other civilians badly wounded.
Hell yeah. Dude's rock. That's NASCAR, baby.
In the days leading up to his death, neighbors heard him ranting that the Freemasons were conspiring to kidnap his 2 adult sons.
Plausible.
Okay. Ansel wounded 2 men in a shooting spree on the night of August 2nd, 1999, before disappearing into the bush. The incident is described in riveting detail in a 2014 Herald Sun article by Ellie Turner. Ansel fired 6 shots at a caravan, or RV, on Kentish Road. Resident David Hobden jumped into his truck, armed with his double-barrel shotty, and went to investigate the shootings. He lost an eye when Ansel put a bullet through the windscreen of his truck.
That's sad.
Hobden ran to alert his neighbor, Brian Williams, who, quote,
No, not that Brian Williams.
who, quote, waxed wrath at the state of his mate's face and grabbed a baseball bat.
Some of these people's idioms are baffling to me. I understand, you can wax poetic, but
Yeah.
how do you wax a noun?
Right, I mean-
are we waxing podcast right now? I mean, I guess, yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, yeah. Context clues.
Okay, sure.
He charged at Ansel with his baseball bat, who was trying to steal the injured man's truck. I smacked him straight down the forehead, and that's when he blew my hand off, Mr. Williams told police. He was going on about stealing his children and Freemasons and being a baby killer. Oh, just, he was mad, mate. Ansel fired shots at Williams' house, and then he ran away, his rifle in one hand and Mr. Hobden's shotgun in the other.
Shoddy.
After he disappeared into the brush, the police set up a roadblock. The next day, a man was leaning on a cop car at said roadblock, quote, chatting to the officers when a bullet blew a hole the size of a baseball in his pelvis. He was flung forward, screaming on the ground. The shots were coming from light scrub behind the roadside. The cunning fugitive had sneaked through the bush and was hidden by dappled tree shadows. A veteran policeman named Sergeant Glenn Anthony Houston was struck in the abdomen by a bullet that ricocheted off the metal door of his police cruiser, and his bulletproof vest hadn't been fastened properly, and it struck him on a Velcro strap that should have been covered by a Kevlar flap, but was not. What are the odds? This tiny, 1-inch square...
Skill issue. And question, when you say he disappeared into the brush, that means you're talking about scrub, roadside scrub. How is that different from the bush, as it's the capital T, capital B?
It could be one and the same.
There's no way of knowing.
I think it's on the highway through these areas is kind of the highway's the only thing. And so on either side you've got, so I think that was what it was. I think so. I think it's one and the same. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The policeman died later that day. Another policeman, the rookie of the... interrupting this life or death story with pedantry.
As is our thing.
Yeah, it's kind of that's kind of the bit.
I mean, if it happened in Australia, is it really even true? Did it happen? If you die in Australia, do you die in real life? Or do you wake up? Just
In
before
England. This is all very sad. Please no more 1-star reviews.
You know what? I would accept that. I would accept if Rod Ansel's one of his adult sons who escaped kidnapping by the Freemasons gave us a 1-star review. I would wear that as a badge of honor. I'm sorry about your insane father. I love him so much.
Another policeman, the rookie of the pair, who was not wearing a bulletproof vest, he returned Ansel's fire. He would later say, the only verbal communication I had with the gunman was when I was reloading the shotgun for the first time. I called out to him to put his weapons down. He called back, you're all dead.
Hell yeah.
Making this seem even more like a Michael Bay movie, this is when troop carriers, quote, came hurtling down the highway. The first driver hit the brakes and swerved as he heard the gunfire. The The four-wheel drive rolled when the second car crashed into it, unable to stop in time. Ansel got up on one knee and began lining up the cops who were crawling out of the vehicle. But this rookie cop, Constable Jamie O'Brien, got a clear shot. The autopsy showed 33 bullet wounds and grazes to Ansel's body. 2 were fatal. 1 shot ripped through his aorta. He fell face down in the dirt. The real mystery is the fact that Rod Ansel had apparently escaped the roadblocks by clinging to the back of a train.
Oh, so metal.
Which would have essentially allowed him to live forever in the bush. But instead, he came back to fight the cops. But then again...
You gotta have goals.
Then again, this mystery is likely solved by the autopsy, which showed that he was very high on methamphetamine. Rod Ansel was given a full Aboriginal burial in Arnhem Land.
Citation needed.
A strange, sad end to the man who is most likely the real Crocodile Dundee.
I love him.
What do you think about that? Yeah.
I love him. I mean, you know, we have that here. We have like meth guys doing the same thing, but like
there's an element of like Ruby Ridge in there too with this though.
Oh yeah. I mean,
I'm sort of surprised you hadn't heard of him. This seems like something that's very much in your wheelhouse.
No. Well, the next guy we'll talk about, I had, well, not Paul Hogan, but the next Australian guy. I don't know. There's such a self-direction to that life story, right? Like this guy was just like, you're not going to give me money you steal my entire personality. You get no money from that. I reject all of this, you know, and then goes down a blaze of glory, right? Like there's a reason that we like, we still watch, you know.
Butch Cassidy?
Yeah. I was going to say, there's a reason we still watch Bonnie and Clyde, you know. I mean, that's the other thing about Americans and Australians. You know, we have this rich, like, anti-authoritarian, anti-hero. Yeah, exactly, that, you know, and...
Because we are rebel nations.
Yeah.
Sort of.
But, you know, don't do meth.
Yeah. Yeah, that didn't help. No. Yeah. I'm kind of surprised that Paul Hogan dared to... This Rod Ansel guy seems like somebody you wouldn't want to piss off. I'm kind of amazed that he was this. He didn't just settle with him in court, you know?
I mean, I'm largely blowing this out of my ass, but I feel like there's like a similar British, like the class system in Australia is similar to like the way it is in Britain, where it's just like if you like the people in like Sydney and the cosmopolitan types like look down on these guys as you know, like hillbillies essentially. And I'm sure there's a lot of racial stuff tied into that because that was how the Aborigines were living. And they, you know.
They lived in that area for 40,000 years.
Aborigines?
That's the quote. Yeah, isn't that insane?
Yeah, and then they threw them into a bunch of schools and abused them and did bad shit and love white people.
200 years ago, we showed up and...
Yeah. At least it wasn't for something stupid like spices. You know? Not like that idiot Columbus.
Opium.
Yeah, opium. They're just, well, I don't know. Have you ever done opium?
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
So Paul Hogan claims that this man was not the origin of Mick Crocodile Dundee. But Hogan's own origin story is comparable in some way. Segue. Famously, Hogan had many jobs over the years, supposedly as many as 25, including boxer, chauffeur, and a rigger on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which sharp-eyed viewers will note is the first image you see in the opening shot of Crocodile Dundee, while Sue Charlton, played by Linda Kozlowski, talks to her editor/boyfriend on the phone at the beginning of the film. Contrary to popular rumor, and the lore around Paul is strong in Australia, he was not a painter on the bridge. He's been asked about this very many times and is quoted as saying, "Look, if I had been a painter and you'd turn up every day and said, 'What color are we going to do today, boys?' Ah, battleship grey. I'd have jumped off. I'd have jumped up." Now, it leans to New Zealand.
Yeah.
It was while working on this bridge in 1971 that the naturally charismatic and humorous Hogan, then in his early 30s, decided to try out for an amateur talent TV show called New Faces, which is basically a kind of like American Idol type show in Australia. Hogan was apparently dared to do this by his coworkers on the bridge after observing the whole shtick of the show was that judges mocked the performers. And Hogan felt like the judges deserved similar treating, so he got himself booked on the show by claiming to be a tap-dancing knife thrower. And then he proceeded to make fun of the judges before, according to Wikipedia, performing a rudimentary shuffle and throwing the knives onto the floor.
So it'd be like if somebody went on American Idol and just mocked Simon Cowell.
Yeah, I mean,
circa,
that
like 04.
whips.
Yeah,
That's like
no, it does.
so cool. Good for him. Also, like taking the piss with Australians is just like the lingua franca, you know. This all went down so well that he was invited back for repeated performances for such highbrow bits as making a series of jokes before banging 2 shovels together a few times. It was really easy to make it back then.
You had to be there.
It really killed in the room.
Yeah.
Hogan was soon booked as a regular guest on a news magazine program called A Current Affair, where he so impressed producer John Cornell with his comedic hot takes that Cornell decided to bring him back as a regular guest commentator. It was so easy back then. The pair grew close, and John Cornell would become Hogan's manager and business partner. Cornell was a brilliant marketer. Keen to build up Hogan's image without overexposing him, he signed him up to promote 2 products that would reinforce his rough-hewn, working-class image: cigarettes and beer. The beer ads, for Foster, of course, obviously. Although, I think Victoria Bitters is like the actual... VBs. Got my Winnie Blues and my VBs.
That's good.
Got me holding. The ads became fairly renowned for their fish-out-of-water humor, in which Hogan played an earthy Australian abroad in cosmopolitan London. The character's most notable line, spoken incredulously at a ballet performance, was, "Strewth, there's a bloke down there with no strides on."
I need to Google what strewth means.
It dogged Hogan for years. In another advertisement from the same Foster series, Hogan's character is approached in a London tube station by a Japanese tourist who asked, "Do you know the way to Cockfosters?" which is an admittedly hilariously named area in North London. To which Hogan replies, with a puzzled look on his face, "Drink it warm, mate."
Like, is cocking a beer means like because you're cocking your elbow to drink it. So
you put it to your mouth like you would with a dick.
Taco Bell.
Paul Hogan and John Cornell formed their own production company, JP Productions, John and Paul.
There are layers.
Not like there were any other John Pauls that would have been out there around the time. And in 1973, they created a weekly TV sketch and variety show called The Paul Hogan Show. It sucks.
Think Benny Hill, but worse.
It is wildly. First of all, not aged well is an understatement, but it is like some of the dumbest humor imaginable. I was clicking through a compilation of it, and there's one where the whole bit is just that it looks like a tough-looking punk band with chains and stuff and mugging the camera, and then they just start singing like a quasi-effeminate new wave, and that's the bit. But some of the characters, maybe I'm not judging it. Maybe I'm too close to this. You know what? So let's put the pantheon of Paul Hogan show.
How deep does it go?
How deep does this go? I'd like to spotlight some of the characters that Paul invented on his namesake, his eponymous show. Leo Wanker, an inept daredevil stuntman. George Fungus, a parody of real-life television journalist George Negus of the Australian 60 Minutes. Super Dag, an ochre superhero, complete with terry toweling hat and zinc-creamed nose. His powers included the ability to use his esky in innovative ways. Should I explain any of those terms?
Only if you're so moved.
I mean, I googled a couple of them. Esky is just slang for a portable cooler.
That I didn't know.
Because an Eskimo brand. But ochre is like, literally, according to the Australian National University, is an uncouth, uncultivated, or aggressively boorish Australian male, stereotypically Australian in speech and manner. A typical or average Australian male. Terry Toweling hat. I'm not going to touch that one. Pierce the Wino, an old drunken Darrow, who starred in a series of silent Benny Hill-style shenanigans. Donger. There were few variations on Donger. He has a big butt. He has a big beer gut. That's the bit. There was Sergeant Donger, the tough cop with a bionic beer gut, and Arthur Donger, a caricature of the suburban beer-drunk Australian male. Next, we had Nigel Loveless, a skateboarding 11-year-old, almost 12, which I guess is a bit in the show. The aforementioned Arthur Donger. And lastly, Luigi, a magician with a thick Italian accent who spectacularly fails at attempted magic tricks. Occasionally, Luigi would have an assistant called Maria, and when the tricks failed, Luigi would shout, "Danza, Maria," to distract attention. So I have to assume it was better live.
In the room.
I mean, yeah, when you look at old, like, Fry and Laurie, some of that has not aged super well, but this just looks fucking dog shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. The show would generally end with Hogan in his bridge painter getup trying to flip cigarettes into his mouth. So just pinnacle of entertainment. The McLaughlin group, it was not. How about this? The Algonquin Round Table, it was not. The show did air until 1984 and was syndicated internationally, including in the U.S., where Hogan cannily parlayed his fame into a gig with the Australian Tourism Board, creating a series of ads in the 1980s encouraging Americans to visit the wonders down under, and his offer to slip an extra shrimp on the barbie for you.
I didn't know that was where that was from.
Neither did I, actually. But you said in Australia that they call them prawns instead?
Yes. In Australia and England and any part of the British Empire, I think they call them prawns.
Well, by the mid-'80s, Hogan was wildly successful in hiding large chunks of money from the Australian government, allegedly. He was voted Australian of the Year in 1985.
Dude just loves being Australian, man.
Yeah, I mean, good for, yeah. Who is his competition? Like,
Mel Gibson, maybe?
AC/DC for 10 years running?
Oh,
I guess,
maybe.
yeah, it would have been Mel Gibson.
Yeah, probably then.
For sure. Oh, yeah, I forgot about Mel Gibson being Australian.
Who claims him? Well, especially now. Who, like, he was born here and then raised there, or vice versa?
I don't give a shit.
Now I very much do.
I would just Google it and come back.
Well, I am. That's what I'm doing right now. He's Irish citizenship, too? Like, what the hell? Born in Peekskill, New York. Okay. 6th of 11th children.
Jesus Christ.
Hence the Irish. Irish-born mom. His father was awarded $145,000 in a work-related injury lawsuit against the New York Central Railroad. And soon afterwards, he and his entire family relocated to Sydney, Australia.
That's how you do it. Get rich off an accident and move town. Skip town. Up sticks, as the British say.
Up sticks, yes. Mel Gibson was 12 years old at the time. His move to his grandmother's native Australia was for economic reasons, and his father's expectation that the Australian Defence Forces would reject his eldest son from the draft during Vietnam.
Whatever. Too far in the weeds. I guess Australia claims him.
Seems to be. Yeah, he's got he's got the Order of Australia honor. So yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay.
Well, there we go.
How about that?
So Paul Hogan was like the preeminent Australian on the face of the planet in 1985. And so he and his business partner, John Cornell, wanted to build on the success of the Paul Hogan TV show and give Australia an international folk hero that, in Hogan's estimation, they so richly deserved. And that's how they decided to make Crocodile Dundee. A tale of the trials and tribulations of a gruff but lovable Australian who visits New York City. As we touched on earlier, Paul Hogan claims that he came up with the idea for the film on a trip to New York, where the culture clash made him wonder what it would be like if a real Aussie hunter arrived in the Big Apple. To be sure, this was a deliberate attempt to make a commercial Australian comedy that would appeal to the American audience, and they took great pains to ensure that the script wasn't smutty or violent. John Cornell, I can never say his name, John Cornell.
Like the college.
That's not how you spell Cornell. Oh, it is. My grandfather went there, too.
Please leave that in.
Obviously, I didn't go to Cornell. Producer John Cornell would explain that the target audience for Crocodile Dundee is the 8 to 80 age group. Quote, a demographic like a double-barreled shotgun.
Shoddy.
Paul Hogan was quoted as saying, there's a lot about Dundee that we all think we're like. We meaning Australians, but we're not, because we live in Sydney. He's a mythical outback Australian who does exist in part. The frontiersman who walks through the bush, picking up snakes and throwing them aside, living off the land, who can ride horses and chop down trees and has that simple, friendly, laid-back philosophy. It's like the image the Americans have of us, so why not give them one? We've always been desperately short of folk heroes in this country. Ned Kelly is pathetic. So are the bushrangers. Ned Kelly catching strays from Paul Hogan.
Yeah.
The script for Crocodile Dundee was written by Hogan and his manager, John Cornell, who produced the thing himself. This is really very kept in-house.
Bully for him.
Yeah,
Ned Kelly is like a Jesse James kind of figure in Australia. His Wikipedia page has one of the most, like, he looks like a guy who works at a barber shop in Brooklyn. He's incredible beard.
well, he's played by Mick Jagger, right?
Perfect hair. Well, don't hold that against him. And many people think his image is mushroomed into this like Robin Hood kind of situation in Australia, but there are a lot of people who just say he was like a violent outlaw. But most importantly to my interests, he is famous for wearing a homemade suit of armor, a bulletproof vest, in his last standoff with police.
Was it bulletproof? Given that it was his last standoff with police, I'm guessing.
He was beta testing it. He was also a bare knuckle boxer. He fought a guy over a chestnut mare and won in 20 goddamn rounds. I mean, it'd be like somebody to like be like, well, I guess you could say fuck John Dillinger. A lot of people do, but those people are wrong.
Have you seen a picture of his homemade suit of armor?
Yeah, it's sick.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any eye holes, which I guess would stand to reason. I do see a lot of bullet dents, so I guess it didn't do that bad.
Yeah. He didn't. Yeah.
Nice try.
It's cool though. I mean, the battle lasted a half an hour.
Wow.
And he was only brought down by 2 shotgun blasts to his unprotected legs. He had 28 wounds, and they found him. Yeah. So Ned Kelly was the subject of the first dramatic feature-length film ever. The story of the story of the Kelly Gang in 1906.
Ever. Not just in Australia, but ever.
Ever.
That's wild.
There's only
the first
17 minutes of it that still survive, but it is
That's pretty long for a 19
inscribed in it's literally enshrined in UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, for being the world's first full-length narrative feature film. Fuck you, Paul Hogan. You don't have that. Keep Ned Kelly's name out of your mouth.
So in short, you disagree with Paul Hogan's assessment that Ned Kelly was pathetic.
Yeah, man. Everybody needs folk heroes. And it's also rich of Paul Hogan to be like, yeah, that other guy. This guy whose life I stole and him out of any money for it. That's the guy. I'm the guy. F you, man. It's just like somebody bold-facedly being like making a thinly veiled biopic of like Jesse James and then being like, no, it's not based on him. I'm sorry. I was from when I went to New York. Like, come on.
Paul Hogan and his business manager, John Cornell, sketched out a $10 million budget, which was fairly modest even for the time. Crocodile Dundee was unusual because it didn't go through the Australian Film Commission, which usually supplies financing in exchange for some degree of creative meddling. Instead of going for a few big investors, they targeted a lot of small donations from many, just like us.
Yeah, it's also a big B-movie, horror movie crowdfunding situation. Like Sam Raimi, the initial the rights to the first Evil Dead, and I believe largely why the second Evil Dead is basically a shot-for-shot remake of the first one, the rights are disaster because they were just going around to anybody being like, can we have $500? You'll be a producer.
I didn't
Supposedly
know that.
a lot of dentists in particular. That was like one of the things he's been on record as saying, like, yeah, we went to a lot of dentists. They have a lot of money.
They have a lot of money and they're depressed.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
In the pre-GoFundMe days, to promote this project to potential investors, they gave an interview to the Australian business magazine Ridges? How did you say that? Rydges?
Rages?
Rages? I mean, that just sounds like you're saying it with an Australian accent.
Yeah.
Rages. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go. The article was read by, how's this for Kismet? The article was read by Paul Hogan's childhood friend who just happened to run an investment bank. This bank agreed to underwrite $7 million of this $10 million feature.
Sake.
I know.
What is that in 85 money?
I would say $7 million, I would put it at, I'm going to say Price is Right rules without going over. I'm going to say 21 million. I don't know if that's Australian dollars. I don't know if that's Australian dollars, though. I don't really know what that means. It's not a real currency.
So they paid him in crocodile meat.
Teeth.
Did I say, yeah, that's their
And
currency.
Foster's.
Did I say 85?
85, yeah. I'm going to say it's close to 20 million today.
20,886 dollars.
I said 21, so I went over. I lost by Price is Right rules. I lost, but that's pretty close.
I didn't guess. I abstained.
How big of you? Hogan and John Cornell each kicked in $600,000 apiece, and the rest of the budget, so some $2 million, would come from 1,400 small investors, one of whom was the frontman of Australian rock band In Excess, Michael Hutchence. Do you have anything you'd like to share about Michael Hutchence?
Handsome guy.
Yeah, he's like an Australian Jim Morrison, but
In Excess, a reportedly great band.
that one song is good.
Yeah, I know that one song.
It's a good song.
Yeah, he died cranking it in a noose. Just cranking the hog in a noose, you know, as so many of us have.
I don't know if that's true. Because I always assume that, and then before we taped today, I went and looked that up, and the only person who claimed that was his, I believe, estranged girlfriend at the time, Paula Yates.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Something an ex would say.
But then there was some kind of, because she was dating Bob Geldof at the time, and they had kids together. There was some kind of weird love triangle. And then
Well, what was it? Drugs?
She died of drugs not too long
I wasn't
after.
asking about her. I don't give a shit if she was.
No, they just said it could have been depression and suicide. She said as much when interviewed by the police, but then later when speaking to some journalist or news outlet, she changed the story and said that it was autoerotic asphyxiation. But she's the only one, I think, who's claimed that, I think.
Well, that's sad, and I regret the error.
But we'll never know. But thankfully, before he went, there's really no segue. I can't get back to this in a way that is graceful.
That sucks too, man. I just have to assume that's true, and you know,
What?
I just did a whole bit slandering that man, and like, imagine dying and your ex is like, yeah, he killed himself wanking it in a noose, and that's lodged in someone's brain 30 years later, 40 years later. My God. What a way. Hey, at least we're talking about him, right? No such thing as bad publicity.
Aren't talking about his songs, though.
Yeah.
As a musician, I'd like to know how you feel about that. Would you rather be remembered for the songs you write or for the way that you didn't die?
Does anyone want to be remembered for the way that they didn't die?
Is that great? Great. I forget it was. It must have been Frankie Boyle. That sounds like Frankie Boyle. It's like, why would Elvis fake his own death? If you're gonna fake your own death, you could do better than to fake a shitting accident.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, poor Michael Hutchence. God rest his soul.
And Elvis.
Nah.
Yes, Michael Hutchence donated to the metaphorical Kickstarter for Crocodile Dundee. I would have to assume that like every famous Australian must have kicked in something for this. Olivia Newton-John, Mel Gibson maybe gave something. What are some other big Australians from the time? The guy from Cold Chisel.
Guy from
Guys
Cold
from
Chisel.
AC/DC.
Yeah, half of AC/DC. Nick Cave. The Bad Seeds.
Oh, yeah,
Although I
sure,
think one of them
sure.
was German by this time. I forget when Blixa joined. The Midnight Oil guy.
Oh, sure.
The Bloomin' Onion.
The guy who managed the Bee Gees.
Okay, man. Oh yeah,
Robert
well the Bee
Stigwood.
Gees.
Oh, the Bee Gees. Oh, of course. Oh, my God, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, the
Oh
Bee
man, I
Gees.
should have said that up top. Much respect to the Bee Gees.
Well, at least the main Bee Gee. The terrifying
handsome-
Bee Gee.
yeah, the handsome
Yeah. Whenever one of the other Bee Gees dies, he grows stronger.
He's absorbed them into himself. He's like Jim Morrison, where he's like 1 to 2 of spirits of the Native Americans probably flew in me, maybe. That's what happens to the Gibb brothers. Ah, God, this is dark. We're really punching down. I mean, these people were fabulously wealthy and lived out their dreams, and
Talented.
We're begging
and
for
one of
money.
them's still alive.
we're begging for money from strangers. But still, we've ragged on a lot of dead guys, and we'll
Yeah.
continue to.
Yeah.
Business as usual.
In Excess, Michael Hutchins' band, you remember, provided a song for the soundtrack for Crocodile Dundee, A Different World. The movie also contains a snippet of the song Down Under by Men at Work because it's a movie that's set in Australia, and I think
It was like legally, like you had to put that in, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was hoping there'd be an interesting story about that song, but sadly there's not. I did, however, learn that the meaning of the refrain, where beer does flow and men chunder, has a meaning I didn't realize. Apparently to chunder means to vomit. Did you know that?
No.
That's a good word.
The only regional slang I know for vomiting is haver, right? Because that's in the and I will walk by and I will walk 500 more.
That's Scotland, right?
Yeah, Scotland. But he's like, and if I haver, I want to be the man who havers at your door. And it's like he's talking about puking, right?
No, it means talking foolishly.
Havering means talking. Oh, God, I'm just striking out on this episode. All those people who gave us money are going to be like, they fell off. No refunds.
Chunder's a good word, though.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's like a relative of John Fogerty coining Chuglin.
Oh, yeah. What does it mean again?
Oh, I don't know. My friends in the Mad Doctors, who are Greg Hansen, who runs King Pizza Records in New York, Joshua Park, and Seth Applebaum, now killing it with his many-tentacled project, Ghost Funk Orchestra.
Who does the theme to our show?
Yes, who does the theme song to this very show. That was their slang for pooping on tour.
Chugling.
Yeah, I got Chugle.
Oh. There's a certain charm to it.
Yeah.
The only other mildly interesting story about Men at Work song Down Under is that in 2009, a music publishing company that owns the rights to the Australian children's song Kookaburra sued the Down Under songwriters, claiming that the flute riff copied the children's classic. You know Kookaburra. Kookaburra sits in the old gum tree. That's all I remember.
Really uninteresting lawsuit. What's your favorite song about Australia? Mine is Tom Trobert's Blues by Tom Waits. We'll go waltzing Matilda.
Oh, Waltzing Matilda is a great song. I like Waltzing Matilda a lot. I can't say Rolf Harris because he's been like Me Too'd in a major way. But there's a song called Sunrise, which is very pretty, which uses Aboriginal instruments because that was kind of his thing. Yeah, there's a really good version of Waltzing Matilda by Alex Harvey, the sensational Alex Harvey Band.
Oh, that's a bit of a deep cut.
Yeah.
There's a song by the Pogues called "And the Band Played Waltzing Matilda," which is it's like a young man who's in the First World War who like came from rural Australia and ends up maimed. Spoiler alert: he ends up maimed in the Gallipoli campaign, which is, I understand, a big sensitive spot for Australians. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
All right, now let's move on to the production. Crocodile Dundee. Obviously, Paul Hogan was going to be the titular character, but for the role of his love interest, the writer Sue Charlton, they went with Linda Kozlowski, a Juilliard classmate of Val Kilmer, who'd appeared on Broadway with Dustin Hoffman in Death of a Salesman.
You imagine you go from doing Death of a Salesman on Broadway to like showing your ass for this Australian tourist movie. I bet that girl had some rough days being like,
Oh, yeah.
what am I doing here?
Yeah. She was the only American on the set.
And a blonde woman? Good Lord. I'm surprised she survived.
Well, she ended up marrying Paul Hogan, so.
And I'm happy she survived.
Yeah. Yeah, not only was she the only American, but she was the only American living in a hut in the outback for a significant portion of the production. Crocodile Dundee was filmed on location in Australia in New York City. And per Travel and Leisure, the outback scenes were shot in the isolated Kakadu National Park, which is roughly the size of Germany.
Good God.
Which I'm sure you could pick a state that's like bigger than Germany to compare the size of the park to, but something about being the size of Germany feels very like impressive.
Like an achievement?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's better than being bigger than France.
I mean, honestly, kinda, yeah. This park was located in the Northern Territory of Australia, which had been home to a uranium mine. Which, I know it's probably not dangerous, but it just seems like it is dangerous.
That's just they killed John Wayne filming in irradiated locations.
Oh, well, that was because they did A-bomb tests there. This is just like mined from...
Uranium.
Yeah.
Isn't that like plutonium? It's like the shit that like the Russians drop like 1/10,000th of a milligram into people's coffee and they die horribly of massive tumors and organ failure.
But I'm sure that has to be like somehow like made unstable by combining it with something. And I'm sure it's when it's like taken out of the earth.
All right, man.
I mean, I don't know. Google it. I'll keep reading. See what you get. Go choogle it. Craig Bowles, the Australian location scout for Crocodile Dundee, selected the isolated location because, quote, it showcased a part of Australia that I don't think had been seen. And it was inherent in Paul's nature. He seemed to fit into the landscape perfectly. Because they were so far from hotels, however, everyone on the cast and crew slept in huts left behind by the Pan-Continental Mining Company. Despite the dilapidated condition of the camp, the cast and crew made the best of it, spending their nights around the campfire singing songs in a summer camp-like atmosphere.
Aw.
Yeah.
Well, the Ranger uranium mine was operational until 2021, so they were filming near an active uranium mine. And
I just
don't know,
can't imagine uranium being pulled out of the earth being dangerous. I feel like we had to like do something to it.
Let me just scroll down to safety breaches and controversy.
Okay.
The government of Australia has documented over 200 environmental impacts since 1979. Great majority of these were minor, but... Oh, here's one. In May 2005, the company was convicted for breaching environmental guidelines. The first such prosecution of a mining company in the Northern Territory relating to accidental radiological exposure to employees. Radioactively contaminated process water, so the that cools the nuclear rods, had entered into the drinking water supply.
Sure.
Dozens of mine employees were found to have showered in and consumed water containing 400 times the legal limit of uranium. Here's another one. A mechanic in Jabiru opened the engine bay. He was unaware of the nature of mud and dirt which fell on the floor. Court testimony said in the following weeks, he had swept material outside of his shed where his children played and built sandcastles in mud contaminated with uranium.
Jesus.
About 2 megaliters of potentially polluted water came out in 2002. 2007, water breached a retention pond. In May 2010, it was reported that a dam may have released millions of liters into radioactive water into World Heritage-listed wetlands in Kakadu National Park, home to about 500 Aboriginal people. In November 2013, 4 drums previously used to transport yellow cake were found in a rural area of Darwin. The company recovered the drums amid concerns about the potential spread of radioactive contamination. Yeah, no shit, guys. In 2013, there was an incident at a mine inside Kakadu National Park with about 1 million liters of slurry, comprising crushed ore and acid, believed to have been spilled.
Sure. But, aside from that, Mrs. Lincoln, I can't imagine that, like, pulling uranium out of the earth. Now I, like, really want to get to the bottom of this. Are uranium mines dangerous? Although the uranium itself is barely radioactive, the ore which is mined must be regarded as potentially hazardous due to uranium's decay products. All right, fine.
I begrudgingly concede this point that I made a weird wedge issue of.
All right.
Look at you going to bat for mining concerns.
And you going to bat for cop killers.
Yeah, hell yeah.
That sounds right.
Hope she sees this, King.
Well, it stands to reason that this unforgiving terrain was teeming with wildlife that the uranium hadn't killed. Fittingly, there were crocodiles all over the set of Crocodile Dundee, and an armed guard was hired to protect the production from what was referred to euphemistically as crocodile interference. I guess it's not really euphemism. I guess it's pretty literal, but still.
Pretty on the nose.
Great choice of phrase. As Paul Hogan would later say in his own inimitable fashion, we had guys up in trees with rifles just in case one crocodile came along and ruined everything. Or enhanced everything.
Yeah, right?
There was also a crocodile wrangler on set. This is presumably because Paul Hogan had planned on using a real crocodile for close-ups during the scene where Sue was attacked as she was cooling off in the water.
The aforementioned 80s Speedo scene.
Oh, yes. But ultimately, they opted for a $45,000 animatronic crocodile, which proved so lifelike that someone on the set reported the crew to the authorities as suspected poachers.
Hell yeah, movie magic.
The water buffalo used in the scene where Crocodile Dundee mesmerizes it was in fact real and apparently was a real diva. Paul Hogan would say that the scene took hours to shoot. If the buffalo doesn't want to do anything, it weighs 2,000 pounds and, it doesn't. So you have to hang around. The Asian buffalo in Australia with the 8 feet of horns, that scene took all day. It's like he said, I'll just sit here and you can't do anything about it. I've also seen it cited in various listicles that the animal was drugged.
Well, I just want everyone to know that Jordan titled this New York Bidets and Nights.
Well, thank you.
That's good stuff.
I'm glad you shared that.
The New York scenes were slightly easier to film. Some scenes were filmed at the Plaza Hotel, but not the ones where Dundee is mystified by the bidets. There are no bidets at the Plaza. Apparently something the front desk would get calls for years asking if they could book the Crocodile Dundee room. Sorry, sir. No can do. There are no bidets in this establishment. Is that a reference to something?
No, that's just
Okay.
what I assume they'd say.
It'd be better if you had like a really thick, like honkin', like Hell's Kitchen accent. No bidets. That's the cigar chomping executive. I'm losing my mind. Funnily enough, the movie though that's playing in Crocodile Dundee's hotel suite is the 1965 Sam Peckinpah feature Major Dundee, starring Charlton Heston. Neat little nod there. Do you know that a young Melissa Joan Hart was originally supposed to appear in the film as the little girl who skins her knee in Central Park and is miraculously healed by Crocodile Dundee?
I heard something about that.
Sadly, the scene was cut.
Yeah.
They also filmed on location at Vazak's Bar in the East Village, which was used for The Godfather 2. Also in the abandoned lower level of the 9th Avenue subway station in Brooklyn for the final scenes of the movie. And lastly, the damn knife line. Do it with me now, Jordan. That's not a knife. This. No, you didn't do it with me.
Well, you started before.
All right,
My
1,
accent's
2.
so bad.
1, 5, 6, 7, 8.
That's not a knife.
This.
That's a knife. It's
Knife.
not. It's that. That's a knife.
Oh. Well, that's a line uttered by Mick, Crocodile, when he and
Dundee.
Sue... Dundee. What do you call someone whose name is Crocodile? Croc?
Croc.
Yeah?
Yeah. Actually, that Croc's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Isn't Ray Kroc the founder of McDonald's?
Yes. Spelled differently, but sure.
Yeah.
When he and Sue are being held at knife point by a thought, does it really even matter? Like, where are you talking about? Everyone knows that scene. I don't want to be bothered describing it. However, Ken Shady, one of the film's writers, didn't think the line was funny at all, saying it just wasn't funny on paper. He was wrong. The knife that was used in the scene, unsurprisingly to many, was not a real one, and it was made of rubber and aluminum.
Or aluminium, as they say.
Yeah, good call.
After filming was complete, Paul Hogan's manager, John Cornell, flew to the U.S. to look for a distributor. Per the New York Times, Paramount snapped up the U.S. distribution rights of Crocodile Dundee after 20th Century Fox turned it down after only watching 20 minutes of it. Later, after the first and second Crocodile Dundee movies were huge hits, Cornell gloated to the New York Times that this Fox executive was, quote, extremely rude. I sometimes get pleasure from thinking about what the look is like on his face at a time like this.
It tracks.
In their defense, though, an Australian movie wasn't exactly an easy sell in 1986, because at the time, the biggest Australian movies were Mad Max and Picnic at Hanging Rock, directed by Peter Weir.
There's a subgenre of exploitation movies called Ausploitation from around
Really?
this time that basically...
You're kidding.
No, I'm not. There's two famous ones in particular. Donald Pleasance is in one of them.
What?
Yeah.
What's the underlying, is it just like shootouts in the outback?
Kinda, yeah. Yeah, so Nicholas Roeg, who famously directed Performance, there's our
And The
Mick
Man Who
Jagger
Fell to
connection.
Earth, yeah.
Man Who Fell to Earth, and Don't Look Now, and The Witches. It's always so funny that Nicholas Roeg did The Witches, the Roald Dahl adaptation. There's a film called Walkabout, which is about two white school children who are left to fend for themselves in the Australian outback. And then there's another one from the same year called Wake in Fright. And that is basically just about like one dude hanging out with a bunch of insane, like Australian rednecks. The tagline for this movie is incredible. Have a drink, mate. Have a fight, mate. Have a taste of dust and sweat, mate. There's nothing else out here. That's a truly incredible tagline. And they were both entered in 1971 Cannes Film Festival.
Australian New Wave. Oh my God. What the hell is this genre?
Yeah, and this Wake in Fright movie is like, it's a famous cult movie too, because the master negative went missing. So you could only, I mean, it was a violent film. It was like they killed real kangaroos in it, which is, you don't do that.
You frown on that.
Yeah, it is frowned on. But it was just like, for years, it was just like shittily reproduced prints were the only things that were available. And the original film and sound parts were rescued in 2004. And so it was re-released in 2009. But yeah, Ausploitation, it's a real thing. Oh, Razorback, of course. We have to mention Razorback. It's about a killer hog. You know what's crazy about Paul Hogan? He turned down Ghost.
Yeah.
He turned down the Swayze role in Ghost. And do you know anything about the movie that he then made with John Cornell again?
It's like a bad Heaven Can Wait, right?
Yeah, it's like an angel exploitation movie. He like saves a kid from getting hit by a van, and then like the rest of the film is like, oh, am I an immortal angel now, or was I just drunk? Rod Stewart's in it.
Rod Stewart's in that?
Oh no, sorry. I'm so sorry. He disguises himself as Rod Stewart at one point. Also,
Rod Stewart seems Australian.
Yeah, and Linda Kozlowski's in it too.
Oh, because they were married by that point.
A little husband and wife project. Charlton Heston plays God.
Oh, he does that a lot. He's getting typecast.
And it was a critical commercial failure.
Yes.
Another set of commercials that Paul Hogan did in the late 90s and early 2000s was for the Subaru Outback.
I think I remember those.
It's Outback.
It's Outback, yeah. Did you do any for the Outback Steakhouse?
Not yet.
No rules.
Just right.
Just right.
I mean, there's time yet.
Yes. Yeah, well, I don't know. He's 85.
Get him on the horn.
Paul, it's your cousin. It's your There's one element of Australian culture you have not cashed in on yet.
Me? Oh, Paul. Yeah.
Paul.
He really took it to the bank, man.
Yeah. I mean, when you're Australian of the Year, you can kind of like...
You just write your own ticket.
Like, imagine if you were voted American of the Year. Like, there's really nowhere else to go at that point.
Yeah.
Who would be American of the Year?
Currently?
Yeah.
Pass. I abstain. What was your pick? Brian Wilson.
Oh.
American of the Year. Is Lorraine Warren dead? Yeah, she's dead and in hell. Right.
She's dead, yeah. And no one killed her, so you can't pick that person.
Roger Corman died too.
I know.
I don't know, man. I'm going to close the books on this. No good Americans left. Yeah. Oh, David Byrne? David Byrne's still alive.
He might be Scottish, though.
Right. He's another one of those dual citizenship weirdos. Just pick one, man. Just commit to it. Or go the place with healthcare and leave us alone. It really feels unfair that they get, like, European grade quality of life, and then they just get to come over here and just, like, I don't know, make art with that as, like, a fallback. Jesse the Body Ventura.
Okay. Yeah, he turned into a real hippie lately, right?
Do you know that Jesse the Body Ventura tried to unionize the WWF wrestlers back in the 90s, and Paul Hogan. Here's a Hogan connection for you. Jesse the Body Ventura tried to unionize the WWF at one point, and Hulk Hogan ratted him out to Vince McMahon. Because Hulk Hogan sucks.
Yeah, he does. And he killed Gawker.
Yeah. I remember the Iron Sheik, when he was still alive, his Twitter account was like solely all caps things.
Yeah.
It was like, Hulk Hogan is a dumb son of a bitch.
Well, back to the movie, which you recall is called Crocodile Dundee. After some American test screenings, Paramount made a special international cut of Crocodile Dundee. A similar thing was done to the German-made Never-Ending Story. Basically, to make the movie dumber. 7 minutes of Crocodile Dundee was cut to, quote, speed up the pace to the taste of the American consumer. As reported by the New York Times, most of the cut screen time came from the first half of the film, when Mick Crocodile Dundee showed Sue Charlton around the outback of Australia.
Lose the kangaroo. What is there to show? That'll kill you. That'll kill you. That won't just paralyze you. Over there's the horizon, and there's a few of those blokes we killed. The descendants, they'd been on this land for 40,000 years, and then we came here. Fancier Fosters. Tour of the outback. I can see why no one wanted that committed to screen.
They also dropped scenes that contained too much Australian slang because they feared that American audiences wouldn't be able to follow.
Hell yeah.
And they cut some F-bombs to ensure a PG rating, which is probably why I was allowed to see this. Probably the last time I saw this when I was, like, PG movie age. Hilariously, Paramount added quotation marks around crocodile on the posters of the movie and the title card so that Americans would understand that this was a man's nickname and not a movie about a crocodile.
It would have been so much better if it was about a crocodile, like Free Willy, but with a crocodile. Or like Gentle Ben with a crocodile.
Paul Hogan was in the Flipper remake in the 90s.
That's right, he was.
With, who was the kid in that? Was that Elijah Wood? It was Paul Hogan and Elijah Wood. I can't believe I pulled that out.
That's cute.
I know, it is.
I forgot about how racist Australia was. Like, all these stories that are about, like, from, like, the past 4 years where they, like, finally got around to changing the place of a name. Well, because I remember seeing this thing, like, 10 years ago that was, like... They have places called Murdering Creek, Skull Hole, and The Leap, which are all references to frontier violence against the Aborigines.
The Leap. I don't even want to know.
Yeah, they were obviously throwing them off it. I can't believe that shit. And this is all these search results are from like the last 6-7 years.
What did you
Fine with
search?
it until then. Racist place names in Australia.
Hope you're enjoying this, Phil. Crocodile Dundee hit Australian cinemas on April 24th, 1986, and made its American debut that September. Paul Hogan had high hopes, telling Cinema Papers on the eve of the film's release, "I expect it to gross millions of dollars around the world, and I'm planning for it to be Australia's first proper movie. I don't think we've had one yet. Not a real, general public, successful, entertaining movie."
Do you think he was taking the piss?
I mean, name one. An independent Australian movie. Or not even independent, an Australian movie. It is still the biggest domestic hit in Australian movie history.
Oh, this is extra funny. That Ned Kelly Gang movie in 1906 was produced in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
Also, Mad Max, Road Warrior.
Yeah, okay.
Also, the aforementioned Picnic at Hanging Rock, which...
That wasn't a hit, though, on this. That wasn't a blockbuster. The Crocodile Dundee became the second highest grossing film of 1986 in the United States, behind only Top Gun, earning $175 million in the U.S.
So much of which was hidden from the Australian government. Allegedly.
It ultimately made 37.3 times the production budget in world box office numbers. So if it cost $10 million, that means that it would have made $373 million worldwide. That's crazy.
Do you know Melbourne had one of the first ever film studios, and it was operated by the Salvation Army? between
What?
1897 and 1910.
Why were they making movies?
Well, whatever the case, man, is Australia has like a rich history of cinema. If you just Paul Hogan 1985 cinema, I'll hope it'll be the first Australian movie ever.
No,
Crikey.
first proper movie. Oh, he did say proper movie. Okay. Well, he earned an Oscar nomination. Check that out. Paul Hogan, John Cornell, and writer Ken Shady were nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. They lost to Woody Allen for Hannah and Her Sisters.
The first Australian film that won an Oscar was a documentary, and it won in 1942, Australia's first Oscar. The fuck is this guy talking about?
But you know what he means. Something that'll rival Top Gun.
Well,
Hogan lost an Oscar, but he did win a Golden Globe for Best Actor for a comedy motion picture. This is just nuts. This just speaks to what a phenomenon he was. Paul Hogan co-hosted the Oscars in 1987 alongside Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn.
did he do it in the vest and hat and everything?
There were no sleeves. This man has never worn sleeves. He also did a turn on SNL as the host.
Okay.
The New York Times called Crocodile Dundee, quote, the movie phenomenon of the year, describing it as, quote, a sort of sweet-tempered, commonsensical Rambo. Paul Hogan would always say that he was a little disturbed that Americans saw his character as a combination of Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone.
Breaker Morant? Come on.
What is that? I don't know what that
Famous
is.
Australian film. Not to mention Gallipoli. Sorry, I'm not over that.
Get this. Director Ingmar Bergman owned a copy of Crocodile Dundee on VHS.
Dude, that's up there with, was it Chairman Mao having Bruce Lee movies? Like screened
I
for
didn't
him
know
privately?
that. Oh, I
That
didn't
was in
know
a Bruce Lee
that.
episode.
Oh, actually, no, I do remember that now. I mean, it's kind of like Osama bin Laden's film, like what was on his hard drive.
I thought it was porn. I thought it was like a bunch of porn.
But it was also like, wait. Oh, there's a TV special, Bin Laden's hard drive, made in 2020, and it's on Disney Plus.
Oi.
Now I need to find this. Hang on. No way, I found it. They on his hard drive were found Cars, Chicken Little, and Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs, and an awful lot of pornography. Yes.
Yeah. Good for him.
And documentaries about himself, including the 2008 comedy documentary Where in the World is Osama bin Laden, and books on popular conspiracy theories about 9/11.
Oh, hell yeah. American audiences were already dimly familiar with Paul Hogan due to all of the work he did for the Australian Tourism Board, which he apparently did pro bono, just in the name of Aussie pride.
He's the top Australian.
He's the Australian of the Year, 17 years running. The success of Crocodile Dundee revolutionized tourism in Australia, seeing how it was basically one giant advertisement for how awesome they are. In 2016, Peter Hook, not that one, but the communications manager at Kakadu Tourism, told Travel and Leisure in '86, Australians hadn't even been to Kakadu, let alone Americans. Basically, Kakadu was a mining area. Uranium was its biggest mineral. The government actually built a road from Darwin to Kakadu, not for tourism, but for mining. I don't know what that last sentence means. The film brought tourists, and the area became more accessible with the construction of improved roads. In 2016, Tourism Chief Executive Tony Mayle told Perth Now, Perth Now, the film helped put Australia on the map, let alone Kakadu.
Let alone Kakadu.
Adding that Crocodile Dundee and the Kakadu National Park still get an average of 135,000 Google searches monthly. According to The Guardian, they even started giving Crocodile Dundee tours in the aforementioned Kakadu National Park, where the movie was filmed, and in Darwin, where you can have close encounters with live crocodiles. 3 hours away in Jabiru, you can stay in the indigenous-owned Mercure Crocodile Hotel, which is shaped like a crocodile, before exploring the wilderness of the aforementioned Kakadu through guided tours, scenic flights, or arts and crafts lessons with indigenous Aborigine tribes who have lived in the Northern Territory for, as previously mentioned, 40,000 years.
You should do the next part.
Yeah, it's funny film, great line about the knife, Paul Hogan, cute guy, handsome, nice muscles. Much of this has not aged well, as you know, you might surmise from the low-hanging fruit of his comedy show that launched him to stardom. There's an article in The Guardian by a writer named Luke Buckmaster from 2018 that just shows the astonishing breadth
Of the offense.
quite offensive things that happened in the film. I mean, for starters, Sue, the journalist, she is not actually a journalist, but working for her boyfriend for her father's paper. That's a rich text. We'll move on. There are comparisons made between the indigenous Aboriginal tribes arguing for land rights in Australia to fleas arguing over who owns the dog they live on. And of course, Mick asking Sue Charlton's chauffeur, who is played by Reginald Vell Johnson, aka Carl Winslow from Family Matters and the cool cop from Die Hard,
Oh, yeah.
what tribe he's from. The article, like, that's the thing about, like, I mean, come on, man. Well, actually, maybe not. Maybe he'd never seen a black person. That part I buy. There's also there's a moment of outright transphobia. There's a trans woman that Paul Hogan is talking to before a friend pulls him aside and says, "I've been trying to tell you all night, that girl, she's a guy." And Dundee grabs the woman in the crotch and points and yells, "A guy dressed up like a Sheila. How about that? Or look at that." And the pub explodes into rapturous laughter and applause. He grabs another woman in the art gallery, and Sue says, "It's okay. He's Australian." Of course, Paul Hogan has some enlightened thoughts about this. While discussing cancel culture with The Project, he's quoted as saying, "It's sometimes understandable, and in some cases, stupid. In the case of me and the shows I did, it was never designed to hurt anyone." I just love starting a sentence with, "In the case of me." I'm taking that. Per the Daily Mail, Hogan told the Australian, "I don't think I ever did anything with any sort of malice." Okay, man.
The success of Crocodile...
we forgot to mention one. Sorry.
What's that?
There's in the sequel, he's trying to talk a suicidal man down from a ledge. And so he stops this guy from killing himself and then hugs him. And the guy says something like, "Well, now I can go back to Steve." He's a gay guy. And then Dundee lets go in disgust.
And does the guy fall off the bridge after that?
I don't believe so, no.
Oh.
Greatest living American of the year. Character actor Dan Hedaya.
Yeah. I was going to say, I would have... Were he still alive, I would have accepted Leslie Nielsen.
Oh, yeah, good one.
Although,
too.
is he Canadian? He seems like he would be Canadian.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. He's Canadian.
I have a sincere vote, and it's Willie Nelson. I have a sincere vote.
Sure.
And it's Willie Nelson.
Okay. The success of Crocodile Dundee proved to be the predictable blessing and a curse for Paul Hogan. In 2022, he told Mark Meats, because of the ridiculous success of Dundee, which is still the most successful independent film ever made, it's sort of like, oh, whatever I do next will flop by comparison. So why bother? So I mentally sort of retired after the first one. And although Paul Hogan and Linda Kowalski starred in the 1988 follow-up Crocodile Dundee 2, it was not well received by critics and failed to out-earn the original, although it still made the top 5 at the box office in 1988. It has a 9% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Ooh.
But Ronald Reagan watched it at Camp David and apparently liked it.
This was during the Middle East Accords?
So it's got that going for it. At one time in the early 90s, Paramount was considering a crossover sequel with one of its other big 80s franchises, which would have birthed Crocodile Dundee meets Beverly Hills Cop.
That is so funny. I assumed they would have come up with a better title, but I also assumed that they wouldn't have.
Yeah, no. Yeah,
And
it would have been the Abbott and Costello rule. Yeah.
Just being so funny that Axel is not referred to as anything other than Beverly Hills
Beverly
Cop.
Hills Cop.
Like the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Ultimately, Eddie Murphy vetoed the idea. But then he went on to make Pluto Nash. As you mentioned earlier, Paul Hogan was offered the lead role in Ghost, which eventually went to Patrick Swayze. And he turned this movie down to star in Almost an Angel. The third installment of the Crocodile Dundee franchise, 2001's Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, is so bad that we just as soon not mention it. It was nominated for a Razzie Award for Worst Remake or Sequel, but lost out to Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes.
Good. He did get a marriage out of it, though. There was a love connection made between Paul Hogan and his co-star Linda Kozlowski, which is hilarious because Roger the God Ebert specifically commented on the lack of romantic chemistry between the two leads. Their union caused a bit of a typically Australian scandal, since Paul was already married to a woman named Nolene Edwards, whom he met as a teenager at the pool where he was a lifeguard way back in 1958. He would later say, "I had 3 sons by the time I was 22, so I had to grow up very fast." As reported by E.T. Canada, the famed bigamist, and Edwards separated briefly in 1981, but married again less than a year later. They would part for good following the filming of Crocodile Dundee. It was one of the downsides of Hogan's experience. It became a very public divorce, with the media depicting Hogan, rightfully so, as abandoning his family. But Hogan wed Kozlowski in a private ceremony in Australia in 1990 at a mansion that he built as a wedding gift for his bride.
That's cute.
There were no rooms for his other 3 sons.
Has there ever been those marriages like Liz and Dick where they divorce and then they marry again? Has the second marriage to the same person ever stuck? I can't think of one.
I don't care. The pair had a son named Chase, and they settled in Los Angeles, where they raised him together. Sadly, they split up in 2013, with Kozlowski telling the Sydney Morning Herald, "Honestly, we just naturally grew apart." They would frequently say in interviews how little they had in common, but previously spun it as opposites attracting. She said, "I lived in Paul's shadow for many, many years, and it's nice to feel my own light right now." The divorce was very amicable, with Hogan himself saying, "It was 20 wonderful years, 2 or 3 that were sort of like worn out. I'm very flighty. A woman lasts for about a quarter of a century and then they get bored with me." That's medium funny. He refused to characterize the 19-year-old marriage as a failure, saying, "How can you fail after a quarter of a century? Failed marriages are when 2 people stay together even though they have long ago lost interest." Kozlowski received a one-off payment of $6.25 million and the right to remain living in their Venice Beach home for 4 years, or until she remarried, whichever happened first, while Hogan, bless his heart, kept his eye on the prize. He retained his rights to Crocodile Dundee the character and the film company that produced the classic films.
Australian actress Rebel Wilson said in recent years that she approached Paul Hogan to make a Crocodile Dundee reboot with her starring in the lead role. Obviously, it would have Paul Hogan in it in some way, she said, but he didn't want a female to play Crocodile Dundee. "I think it's a travesty, as I think out of anyone in Australia, I'm the one most suited to do it."
There's like, we're misreading all of these quotes.
Yeah, I think there's
right?
yeah. As Americans, and I think I'm fairly certain that there's some degree of sarcasm there, although she clearly did really want to do it. In January 2018, fans of Crocodile Dundee were excited to see teasers that seemed to hint at a new sequel. This was followed by an expensive and extensive ad at the Super Bowl featuring Danny McBride, Chris Hemsworth, and Paul Hogan himself. The trailer-like clip fooled many into believing that there was something bigger in the works, but instead, it was merely a $27 million ad campaign designed to revitalize Australian tourism. Australia's Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, the Honourable Stephen Siabo, told Tourism Australia this is the single largest investment Tourism Australia has ever made in the U.S. market. The ad campaign had another result, pissing off Crocodile Dundee superfans. According to Slate, many people wish the reboot was real, with some fans even banding together to sign a petition. The Daily Mail reported that Paul Hogan had no plans to make another Crocodile Dundee movie. He told the Today Show, "It's not gonna happen." But for all we've said about Australia over the course of this episode, I find a certain degree of sweetness in Mick Crocodile Dundee.
Yeah, I mean, the ways in which you can point out the negativities are so cartoonish, but I also think this movie is very funny. Paul Hogan is an incredibly charming man. He might be not good at sketch comedy, but he's very charming, like incredibly. The things I'd do for 1980. Yeah, never mind. And like I said again, man, every Australian I've ever met has just been a delight. Sometimes a delight that would result in astounding hangovers for me, but a delight nonetheless. So please don't take my taking the piss of them off them. Taking the piss of them. Taking the piss from them.
From them. I'll go with from them.
taking the piss
To them.
within them of
Where is the piss? And where could it be removed? How do you remove the piss? How do you take the piss off someone? Catheter?
very quietly. Catheter? Yeah, Australia's great. You know, just like two of my favorite bands of all time, and history of lovely, charming people, and
Great Barrier Reef.
fun movie. Oh yeah, they got great reefs. Oh, Royal Headache. I forgot about Royal Headache. They're probably one of my favorite bands of the past 10 years. Incredible punk band who I believe just broke up because they were Australian and the lead singer was like a mess. But yeah, I forgot about Royal Headache. Great band. You got a kicker? Did I interrupt your kicker? Okay,
No.
sorry.
I'd like to leave you with this quote from Paul Hogan. He talked about how kind of disturbed he was that people in the U.S. saw his character as a cross between Chuck Norris and Rambo. But for him, this really wasn't the heart of his creation. He said, when Crocodile Dundee was due to be released, the movie scene is screaming out for a movie hero who doesn't kill 75 people. Less of those commandos, Terminators, ex-Terminators, and squashers. Makes a good role model. There's no malice in the fellow, and he's human. He's not a wimp or a sissy just because he doesn't kill people. And you know, for an Australian, that's as much as we're going to get. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I mean, I also think it's funny where he's like, yeah, Americans just thought of me as a cross between, you know, Robert Redford and Bruce Lee and Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ronald Reagan, Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, Marlon Brando,
Ned Kelly.
Ned Kelly, 3 of the 4 guys on Mount Rushmore.
At least 2 of the Beatles.
At least 2 of the Beatles, sure, yeah. Elvis Presley's bass player. Jerry Lee Lewis's bass player that he shot in the chest. But I didn't think of myself that way. Australians, hit me up. You're hilarious. I love you. I'll get drunk with you anytime of the week. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time. Too Much Information was a production of iHeart Radio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeart Radio, visit the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.